When you're fighting bad guys, in the movies it's easy because they always look like this. They always are wearing a black hat or a mask of some sort. And the good guys are always wearing a white hat. It's easy to tell who to root for. However, in today's real world, when you're fighting against fascism, the Nazis would be dressed like this, the stormtroopers kind of look like this. You have to be really careful because just because you're fighting against this and you appear to be wearing a white hat, be careful because you may actually not be all that different than the bad guys. Antifa. Let me take you back to June of 2017. Riot police had to force Antifa, the protesters, out of a downtown park in Portland, Oregon, because the group had used slingshots to launch balloons filled with urine, feces, and chemicals. I don't know how you get poop in a balloon, but they did it. Do your own math. Now, they weren't firing those at the alt-right group that they were there to protest. They were firing them at the police. They also launched rodent poison gas, bricks, rocks, red-stained tampons at the police. These are classy folks. Police seized hammers, scissors, brass knuckles, chains, and any other weapon they could find from the rioters. But they were there to protest the fascists. Why were they attacking the police? Antifa says they want to shut down fascism. Well, I do too. I mean, aren't we, most of us, against fascism? You would think so. But Antifa is complex. In the last episode, we defined what Antifa was. When did they start? We discussed Nazis may love Trump, but does that mean Trump loves Nazis? And the last one, stop hate by any means necessary. Poop balloons kind of sounds like any means necessary. And that's where we want to start. Do the ends justify the means? That's the main question. Do they? For Antifa, the answer is always yes. Historically, they have a point. After all, didn't the U.S. partner with Stalin to defeat Hitler? The ends justified the means. But that also is a question that I remember as a kid we used to ask. If you could cure all cancer by killing all of the bunnies, would it be the right thing to do? I don't know. Yes, no, what's the right answer? We don't really struggle with that anymore. We're not going to kill all the bunnies, clearly. But should we, if that meant that all cancer would be gone? That was what we decided when we went to work to stop Hitler. However, more Russian Jews died under Stalin than Jews died under Hitler. We were in bed with bad people, and we paid for it for almost 50 years. Even the German pastor, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, was part of a conspiracy to assassinate Hitler. He was a pastor. He was a pacifist. A pastor justifying murder? Does the end justify the means? Does that mean Bonhoeffer was part of Antifa? These are tough questions that the media really is never giving you. Few would argue that violence wasn't justified in fighting Adolf Hitler and his Nazi regime, or even Mussolini's rule in Italy. Their fascism was clearly evil. If Antifa's primary goal was to make sure that the world never saw another Nazi regime, what's wrong with that? Kill all the bunnies. But why are they now classified as a domestic terrorist group in the U.S.? How did they get from trying to stop Hitler to smashing windows in a Starbucks in Washington, D.C.? Well, we have to go here. To answer that, we need to trace the root of Antifa from its start in Europe to its current version in America. Now, Almost as soon as Mussolini's black shirts began terrorizing Italy in the 1920s, the first anti-fascist group, made up of Italian communists, socialists, and anarchists, opposed them. Remember that. The first were communists, socialists, and anarchists. Not a lot has changed. In Germany, an alliance was formed between communist and social democratic workers trying to oppose the rise of Hitler and the Nazis. They called their group, and I'm going to butcher this, Anti-Fascistic Action or something. I don't know. The Germans use too many letters. That's why they lose wars. Just mark my words. I'd like to call it Antifa for short. And they did too. That's where the modern Antifa group, including those in the US, get their name. And the double flag symbol that was designed for the original German Antifa group is still used today. Now, once Hitler took control of the German parliament in 1933, he shut down Antifa. Likewise, Italian and Spanish anti-fascists failed in their quest to keep Mussolini and Franco out of power. So this has been done before, and they failed. Fascism was like a virus in the 1930s in Europe. It even infected Great Britain. The 1936 Battle of Cable Street in London was a monumental part of anti-fascist Antifa mythology for modern Antifa groups. And it kind of stems around this guy, Mosley. Mosley was the leader of the BUF. And he does look kind of buff, doesn't he? BUF, the leader of the British Union of Fascists. In October 1936, Mosley planned a 5,000-man BUF march through London's East End, designed to draw attention and to intimidate the large Jewish population that lived there. The BUF and the 7,000-man police force assigned to protect the march were not prepared for the 100,000 anti-fascist protesters that blocked their way. Jewish and Irish residents of the East End, all with good intentions, banded together on the East End. But they banded together with the labor and communist groups, and then they attacked. But they didn't just attack the BUF, but they also attacked the police as well. Anti-fascist forces threw homemade bombs, rocks, and even, surprise, surprise, the contents of chamber pots. Those were really nice ceramic pots of poop. Sound familiar? They burst bags of pepper in front of police horses and threw marbles at the horses' feet. They set fire to trucks and stole materials from building yards to construct barricades. They won. But did they? Mosley's fascist parade had to retreat. At least 73 policemen were injured. 84 anti-fascists were arrested for their violence. Today, Antifa hails the Battle of Cable Street as a shining example of what is required to get rid of fascists and even white supremacists, even if it means attacking the police. It's good that they stood up to this guy and the BUF, right? But it's back to the ends versus the means question. You're gonna kill all the bunnies to kill him? 73 policemen injured? Near the end of World War II, as the Allies gained control of German cities, Antifa groups reorganized and focused on hunting down what they called werewolves. Werewolves weren't the werewolves that we know. They were the Nazi party members that went into hiding. However, by late 1945, in the American, British, and French-occupied zones of Germany, Antifa faded away because of Allied bans on political organizing, the overall anti-communist atmosphere, and Antifa's own internal fighting. Antifa groups were generally dormant for the first couple of decades during the Cold War, but then everything began to change. It changed with music, and it started with the skinhead culture. Skinhead culture began in Britain in the late 1960s. Skinheads were mostly young, white, urban, working-class males who congregated around the music of countercultural bands like the Kinks, the Rolling Stones, and the Who. Skinheads totally rebelled against the hippie culture. Hey man, hippies had long hair. Skinheads cut their hair, ultra short, or shaved their heads. Hippies went barefoot and wore sandals. Skinheads wore combat-style boots. Hippies wore untucked shirts, man, and bell-bottom pants. Skinheads wore suspenders and tailored jeans. No peace or love between these two guys. And they were frequently racist, and the skinheads attacked minorities. Then, in the late 1970s, something else happened. From the 70s into the 80s, skinheads gravitated to the punk music scene around bands like The Clash, The Ramones, The Sex Pistols. This often violent punk skinhead culture split into two opposing movements, one neo-Nazi and the other a new version of Antifa. During the same era, in Holland and West Germany, groups of anarchists who violently protested everything from nuclear energy plants to airport construction began a style of dress called Black Bloc. This involved hiding your identity by wearing all black outfits and a mask to help avoid arrest and retaliation. After the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, neo-Nazi skinhead groups sprang up all over Germany, largely to oppose the new wave of African and Middle Eastern immigration there. New Antifa groups also formed, and they adopted the Black Bloc style of dress, and they fought against these neo-Nazis. Meanwhile, in the US, a skinhead subculture also developed around the punk music scene of the 1980s and the alternative music scene in the 90s. American skinheads also spawned both neo-Nazis and an opposition group that first called themselves Anti-Racist Action, because they thought Americans could relate more to fighting racism than fascism. The World Trade Organization protests in Seattle, 1999. They were the first to attract a number of American anti-fascist groups. Then, as the internet blossomed in the 2000s and increased awareness of Antifa in Europe, many U.S. anti-racist action groups switched to calling themselves Antifa. They also adopted the Black Bloc style of clothing and masked themselves, which they used during Occupy Wall Street in 2011. Wait a minute. I thought Antifa was fighting Nazis and racists. Now they're fighting international trade and Wall Street. Yes, that's because Antifa has widened their definition of fascism to include anything that they deem oppressive, including speech and capitalism. For Antifa, President Trump checks several of their oppressive boxes, which is why they emerged from the shadows in 2017 with several high-profile outbursts of violence. They aren't just fighting Nazis and racists anymore. Antifa's anger has cast a wider net, and if police and property get in the way, well, the ends justify the means. It's collateral damage. If you're a 20-year-old kid alarmed by President Trump and the way our government seems to be growing and getting out of control, Antifa may seem like a place that would offer you belonging and purpose, like a street gang, an outlet to get out and do something, especially fight against fascism. To take a stand against fascists and racists and neo-Nazis sounds pretty righteous on the surface. All of these things, I am against the Nazis. I don't want hate. I don't like racists. I want people to, as much as they can, feel safe. But smash the system, and by any means necessary. You see, in the eyes of some, these big ideas grant Antifa a halo of justification for violent methods. But in the end, because of those violent methods, they become precisely the form of oppression they claim to be fighting. And that is what we examine next time.